I think it's time for us to move to the panel session. So the question was about micromobility, and in particular, if what's a dominant trend after the pandemic. Let me share directly my my window. I hope you can see the result of the poll.
Yes, we can see it.
Yep. So it seems that 50% of the people think there is going to be an increase of use of micromobility only if supported the policy measure infrastructure. Any comment on this, Ian?
Oh, lots of smart people in the crowd, it looks like. I think it's fair to say that there's an urgent need for communities, for municipalities, to make sure that the policies and the infrastructure support that increased demand. Otherwise, there's going to be friction.
Yeah, definitely agree. Agree with you. Is there anyone else from the panel who wants to comment on this, or shall we go first through all the polls, which maybe we can do briefly, and then we can continue on. I have a few questions actually quite relevant. And so the second poll was, when do you think you will be able to use a robotaxi? And it seems the majority, even though it's much closer one to the other, is 2040. Is this matching your forecast?
Well, this is surprisingly optimistic, but I think if you look at it, if you think about being able to use it at least for some trips, maybe not for all your needs, this is, in my mind, this is actually quite realistic, depending, of course, the city where you live in. But it's kind of an optimistic answer. It's nice to see.
Also in Nordic cities?
Yeah, in some Nordic cities. Yeah. I believe in some Nordic cities as well.
Okay. I was voting for 2070.
Yeah, no.
But okay. So next poll was mostly for Juho, about how can city help in supporting development and piloting an urban environment. And here is a draw between providing APIs or dedicating road or curbside space for experiments. Not sure if this API was maybe biased by the last presentation, but well, actually it stopped running at that point. So maybe not, yeah. But what do you think?
Well, I guess it should be noted that investments from the city side had 0 votes. So that's somewhat surprising. Then again, the question was, what would be the most relevant? So I suppose probably all of those has some relevance. But yeah, it's not that shocking to see that open APIs and data can already provide a lot of opportunities. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely these are maybe 2 of the most. There's a new vote, so
it's not closed.
Yeah, it's not closed. When I show it, it gets again answers.
Yeah. And of course, for the second alternative, or the second ranked answer of dedicating space, that's one of the big challenges when we're getting to more urban areas. Of course, that space is limited, but then again, obviously the answers show that that would provide a lot of value.
Yeah, absolutely. And then going quickly to the last, sorry. Okay, here is a clear winner about bottleneck for wide-scale use of real-time traffic data. So it seems the lack of open APIs is still seen as the major bottleneck.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I was expecting that this could be, but maybe not so big difference to the next. But yeah, I think this is what people see. People know that there are sensors, but if you don't have the APIs, you cannot access and do anything. So and there are a lot of people are aware that there are a lot of closed systems that the data is available for only for the manufacturer or some specific application only. So I think this is a good positive result that people are getting aware that the open data is important part of them.
Yeah. Okay, this is where the polls from the audience. I have actually one question myself as moderator in here, particularly to the first two presentations. So on one hand, we are talking about micromobility. Maybe this could help including more people and reclaiming our streets and so on and so forth. And on the other hand, we see automation coming mainly driven by, let's say, Uber-like services. Now we have seen in research, I mean, results from what happens is that it's not really maybe the most inclusive service so far, Uber-like. They're mostly used by, let's say, people with middle to high income rather than other modes like public transport. So how, so what I was feeling maybe today was a bit of dualism between micromobility and automation. How do you see it? Or do you see it at all, or just something that happens? So maybe Ian can start, and then I think also Eetu may add something.
Well, I think it's important to keep in mind that all this stuff is relatively new. Even Uber is new. Even it's a taxi model, but it works so well that it is kind of like a completely new generation of service. And in that sense, it's not unreasonable to expect that the cost is going to be high and that only wealthier people can afford to use it in the early years. There's a risk, of course, that it stays that way for different reasons, but the expectation, the hope would be that as these services become more widespread and more prolific, and the costs will go down. Also, the equipment and the technology is new, so there's higher costs for that. So that's one way to look at it. In terms of the duality, like whether micromobility is competing with automation in the future, I don't know if that's always going to be the case. There may be a range of trip distances, maybe between 1 kilometer and 4 kilometers or something like that, where one could argue that there's going to be a little bit of a competition going on. But I think that what we see in most cities is that when you have many options available to you, people are pretty savvy to choose the option that works best for them. So it's not a kind of an all or nothing situation. And I don't expect people to jump into an automated taxi to travel 800 meters or 1.5 kilometers most of the time. Maybe in Manhattan you might do it, but in most places you probably still find the scooter, which is right at the the front of the building, the more convenient option.
Yeah, I kind of agree with Ian that in the long term, I see them more as complementary, and again, depending on the city where you are and what your options are. But also, kind of longer term, I see automation, whether it's taxi type service or shuttle type service, so part of public transportation. I see great potential there in increasing or also kind of lowering the costs in the future when the technology is at a more mature stage, both for taxi services and shuttle services, and kind of enabling mobility options that wouldn't be there if you had to implement them in the kind of traditional model of having the driver and the vehicle there. So when you can do some part of it with just the vehicle and remote operation, I think this increases options for people in the long run.
Yeah, thanks for the answers. And well, maybe Mobility Labs can give an answer to this.
Yeah.
So
maybe one day.
maybe in Helsinki we'll see this kind of
yes, in Jätkäsaari.
Jätkäsaari, something like that.
Yeah.
In the city that we did the research in Hoboken, New Jersey, it's a very small city. It's one square mile. So it's very, very small, very dense, 50,000 people living there. And before e-scooters arrived in the city, it was very common for many people who were commuting from Hoboken to the subway and then into Manhattan every single day to call the taxi and have it come pick them up. It's so effective there, and the service works so well there. It's almost like automated taxi. It's almost like an automated vehicle. It just happens so fluid, the pickup and the drop off. Yet when the e-scooters arrived in the city, a huge shift in trip numbers happened between taxi and e-scooter. And I think that just goes to show that if you've got the right urban form, if you've got the right street network, if you support, because in Hoboken there are bike lanes everywhere, so it's comfortable to take the e-scooter. If you've got the right infrastructure in place to support micromobility, that they will be complementary and not competitive.
Yeah, definitely. They should be complementary. Probably policy should push in that direction as well. There was actually one question I would like to ask from the audience to add to actually about again automation. So could you imagine a day in the future where conventional human drivers will be banned from certain roads, for example, for safety reasons?
Right now, I really can't imagine that, but that doesn't mean it wouldn't be the case at some point in the future. But it's maybe such a distant vision that I don't really see it right now looking at the technology. But then again, we're just kind of learning on what can be done. So maybe some ways to go, I would say.
So you'll be retired by then, and it's other people's problem.
Depending on the development of the retirement age, but yeah, maybe.
Yeah, and then there was another question as well that was it started from the fact that you just talk about automation and not really about connectivity, and this can also connect with the need of having open data as well. So when vehicles will talk to each other, of course this will increase their possibilities, but also we need to make a wise use of this data. So how far, maybe it's a question for Isaki or whoever else, how far are we from the point where we can collect all this data? And then how we can make it happen? That's private companies, for example, openly share this data and make it useful for everyone.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean now in the mobility lab we can install these sensors and the city policy is that the data is open, but when we come to the connected cars or e-scooters who are also private company property, they can decide their own policy about the openness. But I hope cities could be kind of in a role that they're pushing towards that direction, that also this connected vehicle data would become open, at least that level that it doesn't have to identify the person or nothing like that, but it could be used for collecting what is the performance of the traffic system and how everything is working, how much there's close accidents and what kind of trip change are made with e-scooters, for example, and all that information would be technically very easy to get, but if the policy of the companies is to provide only closed systems, then that's some kind of risk scenario.
Yeah, and I think the European Commission has been kind of also advocating this development, and under the ITS directive they have the priority actions on both real-time traffic information and safety-related traffic information, and this is an area where the kind of private companies and manufacturers and data providers and then member states have been talking for the past year or two, kind of finding an agreement on how to use data in a way that you get the benefits, for example, from the safety related traffic information, but also in a way that makes it sensible or feasible for the private companies to kind of produce the data and kind of sell it or exchange it for some other data. So there's a lot going on. I think it's kind of moving in a promising direction in a way that we will have more data, and also in a way that different actors can use it for their purposes with the terms that they agree on. So it's a bit positive now on the future on this.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. It's interesting to contrast what's happening in Europe to what's happening in the States at the moment. You know, the conversations are totally different. The relationships are totally different. The European context is a lot more collaborative and friendly at the moment. Whereas in the States, like in Los Angeles, which is perhaps the worst case scenario, there's a huge legal battle between Uber and the city, who has introduced this MDS, mobile data specification, and that you know, kind of testing the limits. I mean, you know, the city, the public side, testing the limits to see how much data they can force the private operators to provide is something that is also happening in these early years, and there are different ways to go about doing it. In the States, it's a little bit more belligerent. In Europe, it's a little bit more dialogue based, but still, you know, kind of finding that balance is going to be something that still will take time, and hopefully cities will be successful in getting enough of a sufficient amount of data, you know, critical mass of data to provide the input that's needed.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, definitely a good point. And maybe to add on this and to conclude it, I mean, again, we are talking about Nordic countries, so they have some, I mean, one of the focus of this event is Nordic countries. So we have a few different aspects with respect to the rest of the world, weather-wise. So for example, I'm not sure a case in other northern countries, but here in Helsinki, e-scooters don't run over winter. So if people would rely on e-scooters,
Yeah, they do.
They do?
Yeah, some do. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because
With a little bit smaller fleets and with some more, not specifically regulation, but agreements on speed limits based on weather and things like that.
Okay, so
I mean, last winter we didn't have any snow,
that's
so
also
they
the thing.
stayed on the streets.
Yeah, exactly. But 2 years ago, I think they were removed because of that. But I mean, same thing goes for automation. So we know there are challenges in Nordic countries, again, in driving with snow and so on and so forth. So do you think there are going to be different paths of evolution of different countries for these different kind of services in the future? Or we are following a main trend?
Yeah, on automation, I think you can say that because the problem to solve with the technology is much greater, the more variance you have in the weather conditions, then of course this affects the pace or the locations where the kind of first take-up will take place. So the Phoenix Chandler example I mentioned on the Waymo service, it's an area where there's basically no rain and sunshine throughout the year. So it's an ideal place to test and develop the service to get it running somewhere. But then when you kind of add conditions, it becomes more difficult. And this is something I think we need to pay attention to kind of support the development in a way that we can also benefit from it, and so that the challenges we have condition-wise are taken into account.
Yeah, and hopefully be somewhat agile in figuring out what works and what doesn't, and learning from others as well. I imagine things will converge to a certain direction at some point, but earlier on in different topics, whether it's sharing data or automation, I imagine different countries and different cities take a little bit different approaches in the beginning, just because the context is different.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And well, I think we are now at the end of our time slot. Anything else you would like to add? From here, from Ian, anything else?
I just wanted to ask, the survey was really interesting about when people thought they were going to be in automated vehicles, and it's nice when you're in the room with the people who know the technology better than anybody else, or better than most, to get a more informed answer. But what I was curious about is, how is it possible that those who understand the technology can give such a clear indication that it's decades away, yet 2 or 3 years ago, when the real hype was on, vehicle manufacturers were literally promising that by this year, nobody would die in a Volvo anymore because the vehicles would be self-driving already and so forth. Like, how can the manufacturers be so far off? What was it that made such a miscalculation to claim that we're really on the cusp of going to rope?
It's the difference between marketing and engineering, I would say, because if you talk to the engineering departments of the manufacturers, nothing has changed on the opinion or on the outlook of where the technology is. But
Okay.
yeah.
If one company promises that in 2 years we'll have it, why would the others say no, 30 years?
Yeah.
There's no loss.
Well,
There's
that's
nothing to lose.
So I would not be the kind of, you understand the kind of, when it comes to a point when you're competing on who's next, and it drives the discussion in a place where maybe the kind of realism is not there. But I think currently it's much more stable and balanced, the discussion.
Yeah, but still, I was. This also connects to you were mentioning in your slides. I think the CEO of Waymo that mentioned that problems are coming on the road. I mean, and it's much more complicated. I remember some of you may know Steven Spladover from California Path. He's been working on building automated and connected vehicles since the 80s. And I think 5 years ago, he was showing us the year where we'll have level 5 automation, like 2040. And I've seen recently his slides, I think is around 2070, 2080. So maybe also from the experts, there is better understanding of how this is complex.
Yeah, exactly.
That is not really as easy as we were thinking. Of course, no expert was telling you 2020. That's not really true. But still, this is moving, I think, as a target.
In the meantime, it's a good thing that we have bicycles.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. I agree.
Okay. That, I think, can conclude our session. I thank you very much, first of all, the speakers who accepted to be here and gave great inputs. I hope to us all, and I also thank all the attendees, both virtually and with their physical presence in Denmark. And I think it was a very good event, despite the circumstances, and we had to do it in this hybrid mode. Thank you very much, all.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.